Right, evening everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight for this important all members update following the union receiving a revised offer from the national employers last week. The Executive Council met and discussed the offer and after debate resolved to recommend to reject it, and the General Secretary will go into more detail on the reasons for that very shortly. Obviously we'll welcome an improved offer, and like you've heard various rumours that was supposed to be coming, what was going to be offered. But as I told everyone when they asked me, it's only that, it's a rumour until it is put to us formally. Anyways, we now know they have formally made a revised offer, and of course the only reason for that has come. The time and the amount involved, etc., is as a result of the FBU Fair Pay campaign so far. The feedback, they're reporting back a branch after branch supporting the campaign, the pictures of FBU members supporting the campaign, and as I said last week to the officials meeting on Friday, I'm sure every chief as has sat there eating the cornflakes will be checking the local FBU social media accounts to see the state of play in their own brigades, to see how many more branches are on there reporting and pictures showing the support for the campaign. It's been brilliant so far, so we've just got to keep up with that. And just on that point, I'm going to grab the opportunity, all of you, please be careful with what you put on social media. They will use every opportunity they can to try to obviously impact on our effectiveness. And if they can find any excuse to suspend any official or member, they will do so. Just be careful, please. I'm definitely not saying stop the social media campaign, but just be careful of what you do put on there. So, on to the running order of today. I'll shortly bring in the General Secretary, Matt Wrack, who will give you an update on the offer and obviously the reason for the EC recommending rejection. I'll then bring in National Officer Tam McFarlane to update on campaign resources, and then I'll be followed by National Officer Mark Rowe, who will give us an update on the consultative ballot. And then following that, there will be time allocated for questions and answers. The questions will be taken from the ones submitted via the Q&A icon that's on the screen. The hands up and chat feature have been disabled for the purposes of this update, and we'll try to get as many questions as physically possible in, as you would expect. Sometimes the questions get replicated, which we will try to bring together so that all elements of a similar question get answered. We'll be finished at 8 o'clock, so without further delay, I will bring in General Secretary Matt Wrack to give you the update. Thanks, Matt, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ian, and good evening, everyone, sisters and brothers. It's great to see so many people here. A relatively short notice, and obviously we can use this technology to get to people around the country very quickly. I know that from the previous meeting that we held, that in many cases people are watching in fire stations or other workplaces, emergency fire control. So there's lots of people watching, and we hope that people can share the messages that we bring tonight. Look, we've embarked on this pay campaign where it goes through various phases, and it's important that we update and involve members at every single phase. It's your campaign, not ours. It's everybody's pay, and everybody has a right to have a say, to have questions asked, to make suggestions, and through our democratic structures we'll address those. I will just quickly run through what has happened so far, because things have moved and developed. The first offer, of course, came in on the 27th of June, a 2% pay offer. I think it's worth reminding ourselves even then that there were rumours, some credible rumours from a number of chief officers, for example, that the offer even then might be higher, might be 5%, and there was rumours of 4%, 5% and 6%. In the end, the employers made an offer of 2%. It's just worth reminding ourselves how the employers make that decision, because it, again, I think it impacts on how we campaign and try and put pressure on the employers to alter their position. We negotiate through the National Joint Council, the NJC. That represents all fire and rescue services across the UK. On one side, there are 14 employee reps, which are all FBU reps. And on the other side are 14 employers. And they represent all parts of the UK. There are 2 from Scotland, 1 from Northern Ireland, 1 from Wales, and 10 from England. The English ones are determined by the local government association. So there are 4 Tories, 4 Labour, 1 Lib Dem and 1 Independent. 1 Labour councillor from Wales, and from Northern Ireland and Scotland, effectively ministerial appointments. So there is the possibility of putting pressure on. There's not an overwhelming, for example, Tory majority on the employers, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The offer came in on the 27th of June. The Executive Council met, and while the Executive Council was very clear in describing the offer as an insult, they also agreed that this was a members' decision, and that was put out to members' consultation, and you will have had discussions, meetings and so on around the country on that. And the Executive Council reconvened on the 18th of July and unanimously rejected that 2% pay proposal. But of course, it's not simply good enough to reject. We then embarked on campaigning and further discussions about what do we do next over the summer. We then met the employers again at the National Joint Council in October, and this time, as Ian has set out, the employers had a revised offer. We are aware that the employers have approached governments across the UK to greater or lesser degrees of success, making the case for additional funding to make the pay rise. And I think one important point to note in this year's pay offer is I've not heard anyone actually trying to justify it to any great deal. I've not heard chiefs or employers arguing that 2% is the then 2% pay offer was in any way fair. I'm not sure whether they're trying to now argue that 5% is fair, and I'll come on to that again in a moment. In terms of the employers' approaches to government, most significantly, the Home Office, which is the key government department covering English fire and rescue services, has declined that request, and that's an important point to note. But the employers did make that revised offer. I know that some chief officers are trying to claim the credit for that. It seems to us, from the intelligence we've got, is that that was a discussion between various parts of the employers' organisation, and particularly, I think, a number of Labour councillors lobbying for an increase, whatever we think of the revised offer, lobbying for an increased proposal. And that's why that proposal was eventually made. And again, I think it shows the significance and the importance for all of us of putting that pressure on. We know that those employers, in many cases, sit on your local fire and rescue authorities, and they are open to having a discussion with local FBU reps. And many of your local reps have done that and have added that pressure, and that's part of what forced the employers to shift. So that 2% to 5% shift, and I think it's undoubtedly the case that that was a result of pressure from our members up and down the country, from the expressions of anger, the pictures, some of which you've seen on the introductory slideshow, of members in workplaces discussing and voting to reject the 2% pay insult and agreeing to campaign and fight for more. And don't underestimate the significance of that. It's all very well us meeting 14 employers at a national meeting. What matters really is mobilising all of our members across the UK to make our voice heard and to make clear to everyone, whether it's chief officers, whether it's people sitting on fire authorities or fire boards, or whether it's ministers in the relevant government departments, to make them all aware that firefighters are angry at the way they've been treated and are prepared to do something about it. So that is undoubtedly, in our view, that the reason for the shift. The Executive Council, as I say, met on the 6th of October, and there was a thorough assessment, discussion, debate around the significance of that. It's important that all of us assess what the employers are doing, what's going on in the wider economy, what's going on in other unions. All of these things are factors that we need to consider when we discuss what we should do next. At the end of that process, the Executive Council was unanimous, and the Executive Council unanimously recommended that members should be advised to reject this offer for a number of points. We were told back in June that 2% was their final offer then. We're now told that 5% is their final offer then. I think the most significant and important factor that the EC considered is the impact of this on our members' living standards. With inflation running at 10% or so, then a 5% pay offer is indeed a 5% pay cut. It's obviously more complicated because it depends how inflation moves over the rest of the year, but predictions are that inflation may well increase further. And the Executive Council's view, on the back of a decade of cuts, a decade of attacks on conditions of service, a decade of attacks on our pay, that a 5% pay cut should not be deemed to be acceptable. I think that brings us to the question of fire and rescue service funding and the role of central government in this. And I've noticed, just quickly looking at some of the questions that have come in already, I know this is a source of debate. Obviously, we cover the whole of the UK, and fire and rescue service funding is different in the different parts of the UK. But essentially, the role of Westminster is huge in this, whether it is how Westminster funds devolved governments or how Westminster funds fire and rescue services in England. Central government has a huge role in what happens to our service and our profession. And the most significant factor of the past 12 years has been that central government has effectively slashed central funding to our service. And that does genuinely leave the employers with a problem. It lies behind the cuts that we faced, unprecedented closures of fire stations, axing of fire engines, attacks on conditions, but also the attacks on our pensions and our pay and so on. So that's a fundamental problem that we all face and that we need to challenge. I just want to take a moment there to take a step back to look at the role of chief officers, and particularly the National Fire Chiefs Council, because I have to say that they've performed an extremely unhelpful and, I would argue, damaging role over the past 12 years. Every time central government has asked for cuts, chief officers and the NFCC have assisted in enforcing those cuts. Every single, and they have various names now, risk management plans, whatever they're known in your particular fire and rescue service, every single one has been presented as a way to balance the budget, but the argument has been made that this is effectively safe for local communities. They've walked right into every single trap set by central government, and never once, and they've had the opportunity in the House of Commons and elsewhere to say, these cuts have gone too far, these cuts need to stop. There are some chief officers now, thankfully, beginning to say that financial hardships are hitting their employees. We've had chief officers commenting in the press about firefighters using food banks and the hardship that our members are facing. But I've got to say, it's too little and too late in reality, because the damage has been done for more than a decade by central government. So in terms of funding, we are clear that we want additional funding for the fire and rescue service. We want funding to allow pay to increase without cuts to our service, but we don't control that. And all we can do is take to our members offers that come from our employers, and then actually to go on to campaign and resist any cuts that come. But we're very clear, central government does need to step in. Central government does need to provide additional funding to the fire and rescue service. And one thing I think has been discussed at a number of meetings recently is the need to step up our pressure on central government at Westminster and demand that additional funding. That's something we're likely to be asking all of you to engage with and support us on in the coming weeks. So the Executive Council have recommended rejection of this revised offer on the basis that it remains a pay cut. And nevertheless, the Executive Council's view is it is the members' choice. And as a democratic organisation, we should allow members to discuss, debate and make that decision. And so Mark Rowe will come in later about what we're looking at in terms of a ballot, but it's likely that we will engage shortly, and the timelines are not finalised completely for a ballot. It is likely to be a hybrid ballot, including postal balloting and online balloting, and we've run a number of those very successfully, particularly recently in London, Greater Manchester and Scotland. So members will have the opportunity to vote on that. But we're also clear that we don't just ballot cold. We want this to be part of a discussion where members can have an informed debate, discussion about the way forward and listen to the views of FBU officials and to the views and assessments of the Executive Council. So there's an important role for FBU reps at local level, that those meetings at station level continue, those meetings in brigades continue. And I know arrangements are being put in place for those discussions to take place over the next couple of weeks. We're also discussing further online events such as this that we can put in place as well. I just want to say, in terms of the EC's, the Executive Council's assessment of this, our task is to deliver on union policy. And union policy is set by our conference. Our conference meets every year. Our conference is made up of your delegates elected by your brigade committees. Brigade committees are from across the UK who come to conference to represent your views, your opinions, the decisions of your local brigade committees. And that determines how this union goes forward and campaigns. And our conference has been very clear in setting out demands on pay. Conference has highlighted, for example, the particular problems faced by retained firefighters. We've got a huge recruitment and retention problem among retained firefighters, the problems facing our control members and the need to narrow the gap between control members and other members in terms of pay. And let's be clear on both of those points, this revised offer does nothing to make progress whatsoever. The conference has demanded that the Executive Council should launch and engage in a major campaigning on pay, and that's what we're now doing. We want a fair deal for firefighters. That's the demands within the that's the demands within the material that you've been sent and which you've discussed. I was talking to one of the officials from Wales who gave a good example of what one member in Wales had said of our members doing an above average job for below average wages. That's the scale of anger that some of our members are now feeling. I think our members are increasingly tired at how they've been treated, angry at how they've been treated, and it's on the basis of assessing that the Executive Council could not recommend acceptance of this further pay cuts. If we look outside the fire station doors, you can see there's a much wider world out there. You can see that other workers are facing exactly the same struggles that we are. I'm sure everyone has followed closely the disputes on the railways. 3 rail unions, the RMT, ASLEV, the Train Drivers Union and the TSSA, engaged in a long-running battle over pay and conditions. The Communication Workers Union, in both Royal Mail and in telecoms. All of these have said enough is enough, and they're tired of the pay cuts that they've faced, similar to the attacks that we have also faced. In the public sector, now we know that civil servants have begun a balloting process against imposed pay cuts on them. We know that teachers, the 2 big teaching unions, are in the process of finalising their consultation again, a consultation against a 5% pay proposal from a so-called pay review body. And I think most significantly, the Royal College of Nursing is also launching its first ever strike ballot against a 5% pay proposal. The Royal College of Nursing is the biggest nursing organisation, and it's a union that traditionally has not taken strike action. It has never taken strike action in its history, and it's had a tradition of opposing strike action. Nurses are now so angry that they are moving to their first ever strike ballots. It gives a flavour of the scale of anger that I think exists out in the wider society, and I think that is reflected among our members too. We've got a government that is in crisis, that has completely crashed the economy. The tax cuts, I think the tax cuts for most ordinary people are likely to be more than wiped out by pay cuts and by increases in mortgage rates and other costs. Meanwhile, the very wealthiest in society will gain. And if you look at some of the figures, they are quite staggering. They've put a bomb under the bond market with their £43 billion tax giveaway. But because of the crisis that created, that was followed by a £65 billion intervention, as it's called, by the Bank of England, effectively printing, they don't actually print it these days, but effectively creating £65 billion worth of credit. So huge interventions in the economy, and yet they tell us and our members that there's no money for decent pay. So in finishing, President, it is a difficult situation, but I think the mood we are picking up is that people are angry at a decade of attacks on conditions and pay. It's our members' choice, but the Executive Council's view is clear, that we urge members to stand together, to carry on building our campaign, to stand together, determined, sending a clear message back to our employers and to governments across the UK that we're not prepared to take another, in fact, in this case, the biggest pay cut of the past decade, and that we are prepared to fight back. That's the message and the recommendation from our Executive Council to FBU members wherever they work across the UK. Thanks, President.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I'll now bring in Tam McFarlane, National Officer, who gives an update on campaign materials and resources. Tam, over to you.
Thanks very much indeed. Well, but actually more than that, I hope you're all organising and meeting in the workplaces. Because let's be honest, that's what's made this difference so far as part of the Fair Pay or Fire Strike campaign. And I just wanted to set out some of the resources that we put together for officials and members, and some of the things that hopefully you'll expect to see over the next couple of weeks or so as the ballots begins to roll out. I mean, first of all, within 48 hours, we were able to set up a meeting of all FBU officials right across the UK. It was an online meeting, and we were able to get them a new briefing document. So that document's with officials, and hopefully it will give them the ability to answer the questions that you have, and also give you a really thorough update on the situation so far. But please engage with your officials and make sure that you're calling them to meetings and get them to the meeting to actually discuss these issues in the first place. In addition to that, we'll be writing to members direct. So Matt has written a letter. It's getting sent out to all the members. First of all, it'll be sent to members who haven't registered your email with us. That'll be sent by hard copy. For those of you who have registered your email with us, we'll be emailing it out to you. And it'll also contain a short pamphlet that we put together. So Matt's written a detailed letter for you about the situation so far. We've also put together a pamphlet for you as well. And look, I'd really encourage you. This isn't just for you to look at as members. It's also to take the issues forward to your families, friends, and other colleagues as well. In addition to that, we've written to all FBU registered branches. A branch is a fire service workplace where we've got members. So you should get these in your fire stations and your emergency fire control rooms. Okay, now a letter to Matt from Matt, and it also contains a poster in it, a Fair Pay or Fire Strike poster. And look, I'm really encouraging you, get that poster out and make sure it's pinned to the notice board. There's a big part of putting the pressure on the employers and senior managers, and we've got to keep that momentum going as well. So, yeah, that's there. Listen, if there isn't one at your branch, please let us know, because it could well be that your branch hasn't been registered properly. But yeah, check that's there and get it up on the notice board. Now, in the next few days, we are going to be, as I said, writing to you by hard copy if you haven't registered your email address, or emailing you if you have registered your email address. And that's an important point, because Mark's going to set out that a consultative ballot isn't covered by the anti-trade union legislation. It's something that the union can organise ourselves. So we can contact you electronically, which clearly speeds up the process and makes it a lot easier for you to tell us your views on this latest offer. But we can't do it by email if you haven't given us your email address. So please, if you haven't already done so, please send us your email address. Just to be clear, we can't accept fire service email addresses, hopefully for obvious reasons, yeah? It has to be a personal email address. And so if you get a letter through your door, that means that we haven't got your email address. So if you do want to register it with us, please contact membership services at fbu.org.uk. Don't worry, by the way, all this will be in the letter that you receive, and send us your email address. But more than that, if you could send as well some additional details, just in case we've got members with the same name across the country. So you could add your date of birth, your membership number, if you know it, etc. So that's what hopefully you can expect over the next few days and coming weeks. And I hope that's helpful, President. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Tam. I'll now bring in National Officer Mark Rowe, who'll give us an update on the issues surrounding the consultative ballot. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, President. Yes, Tam's outlined a little bit of what we intend to do there. The consultative ballot is going to be a hybrid ballot. As Matt has said, it's an online or postal option. Members will be receiving an option to vote by returning a ballot slip that will be posted to them, or they'll be emailed, as Tam has said, with a personalised PIN. If you do get both, there's safeguards in place to make sure that two votes aren't recorded. As this is an internal consultative ballot and not a statutory ballot, we can utilise the online voting option. We have, as Matt has said, utilised them previously in Scotland, in Manchester, and in London, and they were very successful with very high turnouts on the online option, which is clearly why the government don't want that facility to be available for statutory ballots. So at present, the Executive Council are taking feedback from the regions as to state of readiness and the members' wishes, and when that's complete, the Executive Council will meet immediately again to discuss the time frame for the consultative ballot, for it to start, for it to end, and for the duration of the ballot. So as with when we were discussing moving to the strike ballot, a huge turnout of members is going to be required because employers are going to be watching this, as are the government. So we need to demonstrate through this consultative ballot process that when we declare a reject vote, as I'm pretty sure that that is what I'm picking up the majority of members are saying, that when we do declare that, it's a very clear demonstration of our members' strength and unity and a determination that when we do move to a full ballot for strike action, that the Fire Brigade Union has had enough of below inflation pay rises. Whilst there's no legal ballot threshold for us to beat in a consultative ballot, it's clearly an opportunity for us to demonstrate that we'll smash the threshold should we be required to move to a strike ballot. So I'll close in saying this, President, if I may. Vote reject, vote in huge numbers, and let's clearly signal our intent to smash the threshold when we're called to do so. Thanks, President.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Right, we're now going to move on to some questions and answers, and I see them rolling in. I'll bring them in threes, Matt, and then obviously if it's a question to Mark on the balloting issues, or if it's a question to Tam on resources, we'll jump about as necessary. So on to the question, and as I say, we are going to wrap up at 8 o'clock, so we'll try to get as many as we can in. So the first question is from Matt Cross, who's questioning the strategy. Are we going to coordinate action for 24 or 48 hours at specific times to cause maximum disruption for fire and rescue services and their resilience arrangements, i.e. Saturday, November the 5th, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, etc.? Also ensuring we can extend it by only taking 1 or 2 days at a month of action until we get into late spring and early summer of next year, when longer periods of action will be much more effective. Second question from Leo. How is the FPU going to address the funding issues facing pay deals? Are we going to fight for funding so we do not face any further cuts? And one from Kenneth Stark. Please confirm if we are asking for a 12 to 15% funded pay rise without any changes to roadmap. In Scotland, as you are all well aware, we may be able to have a further increase with some roadmap changes, provided there are no cut to uniform jobs. Okay, Matt, if you start on those first.
Thanks, President. Yeah, okay, good questions. On the question of the coordination and what forms of action we will take, all of those things need to be considered. There are pluses and minuses to coordinating with other unions. First of all, we wouldn't want to lose the significance of our own story, the fire service specific narrative and the need for firefighters to get a pay rise. On the other hand, if workers in different sectors are facing the same challenges about falling pay, then we should work together and fight together and coordinate together. So yes, we're in discussions with other unions. The TUC meets next week. Our delegation will participate in those discussions, and that undoubtedly will include discussions about coordination of action. Again, in terms of the forms of action, I think I've been to meetings all over the country, and there are whole ranges of views on that. Some people arguing for shorter strikes. I think the point that was made about sustainability, and others arguing, and in some cases, brigade committees voting for specific minimum demands of the minimum amount of strike action they want to see. I think all of those have to be taken into account. And all I would urge people to think about is, because there are a range of views, I think we all have to respect that other people will have different views, and those different views need to be taken into account. And the EC will weigh up all of those and seek the most effective way to pursue industrial action. And one of the things we have to take account of is what are the different models that fire and rescue services have of how they try to beat our strike action. On the question of Leo's question about funding, it is a very, very important one. I tried to cover some of that in terms of the introduction, that one of the fundamental problems facing our service is chronic underfunding. It's happening in many parts of the public sector now. Certain parts of local government, frankly, falling apart. So funding is essential, and we want funding to ensure that we can have a pay rise and that it doesn't lead to huge cuts. And I know that some chief officers are out on the road visiting stations saying that they can't afford even the 5%. Equally, our job is to present options to our members and present the pay offers to our members, and our members will decide. So I think we have to do both. We have to fight for pay, and we have to fight for funding to ensure that pay does not lead to further significant cuts. On Kenneth's question about Scotland, look, what we're discussing in this meeting and what members are being asked to discuss is the UK-wide pay offer and the UK-wide pay deal, and that is the NJC offer. And so the offer is of 5%, and we're asking people to reject that. We are aware, and members in Scotland will be aware, that there have been discussions going on over a very lengthy period in Scotland about the possibility, and this was discussed at our conference, so it's all, these discussions are authorised by our conference, for the possibility of addressing the issues further in Scotland, including what the Scottish Fire Service and the Scottish Government want of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and of our members. But I think we need to separate those two issues and be clear that what we're talking about is we want no further pay cuts in terms of the NJC rates of pay. Anything that is discussed in Scotland further down the line will be in addition to what we're discussing here.
Okay, thanks, Matt. And obviously, I'll just echo his views. The first thing we've got to do is get a strong rejection in the consultative ballot, then a big yes vote in the strike ballot itself. And then obviously we'll start discussing strike strategies. And you've got your opportunity to feed into that through your branches, through your committees, to your brigade committees, regional committees, and up to the Executive Council. So please make sure you do that. Right, on to the next question, Matt. This is from Grant Brotherton, and knowing Grant like I do is as subtle as ever. Why are we even putting a 5% cut? Well, it should be pay rise to members. Well, no, 5% cut to members. The EC should not be wasting money on ballots. The next one is from David Berry. Can I ask why we have not planned to strike in the week leading up to and including bonfire night to have the biggest impact and force the government's hand? And the next one from Jonathan Holroyd. Does the fact that private companies have been training at Morton for the last 4 or 5 years to actively cover fire strikes not show that the government are wanting the fire service to now go on strike? Okay, Matt.
Thanks for those questions. On Grant's question, yeah, a blunt question. I understand it completely. Look, and if you go back to the 2% offer, there was certainly some on the Executive Council who raised the question that it shouldn't even go back to members for consideration because it was so insulting. Against that, I think there's the balance of ensuring that members who have a whole range of views have the right to have their say. And I think that's the EC's view this time as well, that yes, the Executive Council's view is that this needs to be rejected, but we're in the strongest possible position if our members on the ground, in fire stations, in fire controls, in training centres, have those discussions themselves and determine for themselves, following that recommendation, following that discussion, that they are rejecting it. That's then, it's not Ian Murray, it's not Matt Wrack telling the employers we have rejected this offer, it is our members making that decision. So while I understand Grant's anger and frustration at that, and I have a lot of sympathy for it, I think our job is to go out and make sure that members across the union now vote accordingly. On Dave's question about when we strike, look, we can't completely pick the timing of these things. Our pay settlement date is in July. We got that offer late in June, and there is a process to go through. For example, I mentioned earlier that the union's conference sets our policy. So the union's conference has policies about minimum periods of consultation. The conference has been very clear to the EC, they don't want members to be bounced into making decisions, that if there are periods of consultation, then there are minimum times for that. And the Executive Council is obliged to follow those conference policies. So unfortunately, all these things take some time. I know in other discussions there's been questions saying why we were not on strike earlier in the summer. It would have been impossible to do that because we hadn't had the offer at the time. We have to go through the period of consultation with members. And although we haven't covered it in this meeting, if we do move to industrial action, then there are all sorts of hurdles legally that we have to go through. Mark and Tam in particular, along with members of staff and legal advisors, are dealing with all of those hurdles to make sure we can meet those requirements. So we can't completely determine when we are able to do that. We didn't know, for example, that this revised offer was coming. It may have come, it may not have come. There were all sorts of rumours, but as I say, there were also all sorts of rumours back in June. So in a battle, we don't completely control what the other side is doing, and we have to respond to what they are up to, and the Executive Council's responding accordingly. On the final question on whether the government wants us to strike, I don't think they want us to strike. I've heard some of the, I've seen some of the theories on Facebook and stuff that the whole thing is a plot to. I'm not saying that the questioner asked is suggesting this, but I have seen suggestions forwarded to me from Facebook that the whole thing is a plot to trick us into going on strike so they can sack everyone and re-employ people on new contracts. Look, that is some sort of possibility. I don't think we've got any valid intelligence that that is what fire service employers are planning to do. That would not be a decision for central government. We are not employed by central government anywhere in the UK. We're employed by the relevant employing authority. So we have had battles where they've tried to fire and rehire our members, but we've fought them off on every single case. We fought them off in South Yorkshire, in London, in the West Midlands, whenever they have tried that. So we know that they are trying to, they have been training people in, frankly, substandard training courses to provide substandard cover, and everyone knows that. Our job is to make that as difficult as possible for them. I think we've got to be clear that if we do end up on strike, that we have to be active. If you think about the other strikes that you've seen recently, the big focus of those is the picket lines, making sure that members of the public know that we're on strike, members of the public know why we're taking that action. But also picketing is the opportunity to speak to people and persuade them, or attempt to persuade them, not to do our job when we're taking strike action, not to undermine our campaign to improve the living standards of our members and of our members' families by working while we are on strike. So that's a key challenge that we will face if it comes to that stage.
Okay, thanks, Matt. We've now got a question from Andrew Sinclair. Instead of a percentage wage increase, why not go down the monetary value route? X thousands of pound increase, for example. Next question is from Jack Fellows. I'm getting asked a lot as to why the original offer in June, why is it taking us so long to get to the point of balloting members? Other workforces seem to have moved a lot quicker. And one from Gary Curran. Who is funding the 3% lift on the offer from the original 2%? Heard the Scottish Government had stepped up north of the border. And then we've had questions coming from quite a few members is, are we negotiating or trying to negotiate a pay formula? Okay, Matt? You're muted, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for those questions. In terms of working backwards on the question of a pay formula, look, the union had a pay formula for some 25 years, one after the first ever strike of firefighters in 1977-78, and we got out of that dispute. We got a pay formula that delivered pay for 25 years. And it did deliver some very big pay rises, certainly in the early years, and it did improve pay and conditions. And that dispute, is a historic one in terms of the history of our union and our industry. But I think first, there's a few points to make on it. First of all, it didn't always deliver pay rises above inflation, and also the pay formula existed for only 2 years after the 2002-03 dispute. Also, I think on both years that it was in operation with our agreement, did not deliver pay rises above inflation. So a pay formula is not a guarantee that we will get a pay rise above inflation. I think more importantly, In 1978, when that pay formula came in, it was on the basis of a discussion for more than 10 years about the need for a pay formula. So actually, fire service employers supported a formula. Home secretaries of different parties, both Conservative Home Secretaries and Labour Home Secretaries, supported a pay formula. And there were other sectors of the workforce in the public sector that had pay formulas. The problem we face now, and this is just facing up to the stark reality of it, the situation now is that there are no pay formulas anywhere else. The police were the last to have a pay formula and lost it some years ago. So we're in a very, very different circumstance. So yes, our policy is for that, but I think we just need to alert people to the dangers of that. On the question of funding, yes, we understand the Scottish Government has agreed to provide some funding to only to the 5% offer. That's a positive step. And we welcome a movement on that. What we haven't got is that same movement from other governments in the UK. But also our assessment is that the 5% itself is not adequate. On the question, I think Jack's question on why it has taken so long, I don't agree. I think what we generally, people don't hear about disputes until the strike ballot has been won and until workers are actually taking strike action. So we've had a lot of dialogue with our friends in the RMT, in the CWU, in ASLEV and so on. The rail dispute has been coming for months, and there were months and months and months of negotiations before they moved to a ballot. That's obviously for them to judge, but it is not the case that they moved quickly. Equally, both the other groups I mentioned, teachers and nurses, again, received their pay proposals from their pay review bodies about the time that our pay offer was made, completely independently, but a similar time. And actually, in the case of teaching, as I understand it, they're still consulting members, so they haven't moved to a strike ballot yet. The civil servants have moved to a strike ballot already, but the Royal College of Nursing has only just begun. And I'm sure people will have seen the news about their announcement of their ballot, which has started a few days ago. I'm sorry, Ian, I don't know if you could remind me of Andrew Sinclair's question. I didn't quite manage to get that one down. You're muted, Ian.
Right, sorry, Matt. Yeah, instead of a percentage,
flat rate
wage increase, why not the lump sum monetary value?
Yeah, it's a good question, Andrew. Look, we follow union policy. That has been debated at our conference in the past, and the decision of our conference, and I can see arguments for it. I can certainly see arguments for it, particularly at a time of high inflation, which is hitting the lower paid harder. But our conference has not supported that approach. And I suspect certain groups of our members would have a point of view on that. The most important point, actually, is that our employers haven't offered it. There have been some settlements in the public sector, for example, in policing in England and Wales, where that has been the approach that is taken. And in local government, again, in England and Wales, it's a more complicated formula, but it's designed to particularly assist lower paid workers. So far, we haven't had that dialogue with our employers, in that all they've done is come back with a revised percentage offer. Clearly, if they came back with a different offer based along the lines you've suggested, then we would have to consider it, and our members would decide.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Right, we've had a question come in from, very similar from several members, along the lines of, what's the possibility of a 5% this year, 5% next year? What's the possibility of a multi-year deal? So that general theme, which I think, Matt, you can answer pretty much all together. And the next one is from Matt Conley. Can our request for pay be based on the average UK pay, which currently stands at £38.13 an hour? Sorry, £38,131, not percentage based. Question from Ryan Binks. Why aren't the NFCC putting more pressure on the Home Office to increase central funding? Our ex-Fire Minister Brandon Lewis has managed to find a 15% pay increase for judges and barristers. And one from Rory Lynch. What would the EC consider an acceptable offer? Obviously, we need 10% plus, but what would the FBU believe to be a realistic best offer? When you're ready, Matt, and you won't need to unmute.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, on the question of multi-year deals, yeah, I think that ties in a little bit with the question about a pay formula. I think, in theory, a multi-year deal would be preferable. Again, although talking to people in other unions, and I know the rail unions have had some of these discussions, I think they're moving away from the idea of a multi-year deal precisely because inflation is so unpredictable. And this is one of the problems that the economic mess has caused for all of us, is that if you look at the beginning of the year, then inflation was at 5, 6, 7%. And I've got to say, one of the discussions at the Executive Council, I'm sure is not lost on anyone, if the employers had made a 5% pay offer back in June, our members' views may have been different. I don't know, but clearly the gap between that and inflation was much lower at that time than it is now. In terms of, I think the problem with the idea, and I don't know if this is what's being suggested by the question, if the idea is that we could take 5%, move on and get 5% next year, just to be clear, there is no such offer from the employers. If the employers wanted to sit down and suggest something like that, then clearly we'd have those discussions. Equally, we don't know what inflation will be in 2 months' time. We don't know what inflation will be by the time of next year's pay settlement date of the July the 1st next year. We do know the economy is in a complete mess, and we do know that mortgage rates are beginning to rise sharply. And anyone who's lived through high interest rates know that has a huge impact on people's living standards, sometimes far, far greater than the pay rises that we can get. In terms of the comment about average earnings, I think that links back to what the comrade from Wales had said to us, that above average job for a below average earnings. And so, yes, the sort of discussions that were had in the 1970s was about linking firefighters to a particular group of workers. In those days, it was male manual workers. Employment is categorized differently today, but clearly the logical thing is that fire service pay shouldn't have to be determined every year by arguing back and forth over scraps. In reality, that actually there should be a formula that links us to a decent rate of pay, that recognises the contribution our members make, that recognises the risks that they take, that recognises the value of the work that they do, and therefore says, that there is a link to a particular group of workers, and yes, they should be significantly higher paid, and £38,000 doesn't seem a particular high rate of pay. That's what the average wages are in the UK. So I agree with the approach. The question is, how do we get there? On I think it was Ryan's question about the NFCC, and yes, I mean Brandon Lewis. It's interesting the barristers' dispute recently. They've offered, I think it's out for consultation, again actually may be rejected, although I think the refusal to increase rates, it's not actually wages, but the refusal to increase rates of reimbursement for barristers has gone on for many, many years with no increase at all. And they've now found this 15% offer. But it does show that action can move governments. On the NFCC, I go back to what I said earlier. Unfortunately, every time they've been asked to make cuts, they've agreed to them. Specifically on the question of pay, I think they've played a particularly unhelpful, let's put it politely, unhelpful role where when we've tried to have discussions, in fact, on some occasions, we've had discussions jointly with our employers, with ministers in the Home Office, and we've made the case jointly for additional funding. And we've said, look at the role that the fire service is undertaking now. You need to provide funding to do that. You need to invest in the future. We've made that sort of case to ministers, and we've got specific letters where the NFCC has intervened and said, you don't need to pay firefighters any more than they're paid now, because we can get them to do all this additional work for free. And that's caused some very heated rows with the NFCC between ourselves and them. So, look, I think the pressure that you can all put on your own chief officers would be helpful. And clearly some chiefs have begun to speak out, and that's welcome. And we should ask more of them do. I think the final questions are really, it's the most important question in a way. What would be considered an acceptable offer? And look, we've taken this approach, and it's the approach that every other union is taking, by the way. And we've had long discussions. One is, some of us have been through this before, but we've had long discussions with our friends in the other unions, in the RMT, in the CWU, in the teaching unions, in the RCN. And no union would say publicly, even in a meeting like this, what we are willing to settle for. The RMT isn't saying it. The RCN isn't saying it. The CWU, in their case, they had in Royal Mail had an imposed 2% offer, but they will not say what they would be willing to settle for, because basically we don't give away our bottom line. And our members will decide that. You know, I take Grant's point earlier that whether this should have even gone out for consultation, but actually I think we're demonstrating very clearly that it is our members that will decide this. We're urging members not to pick up this offer and to carry on with the campaign, but it will be at every stage our members who make that determination as to what is and what is not acceptable. The task, actually, the real figure that's important is that our employers coming back with a revised offer. The real question is, will government put money into the fire and rescue service? They can find money for other things, as people have commented in other questions. We need them now to find money for our service and our profession as well.
Thanks, Matt. Right, we've got a question from Henry Bosley. Does the 5% pay offer come with any additional work requirements, for example, corresponding? Next question from Paul Clark. I think you did sort of address it, Matt, in your presentation, but I think it's worth just reiterating it. We've been advised that any pay award over 2% will lead to cuts to our service and the loss of support colleagues' jobs. A 5% award is being assimilated to 3 on-call stations closing. Some members have stated they cannot, in good conscience, take a pay award that leads directly to station closures or job losses of support colleagues. What message of support has the union got for those members? And then one from Matt Hudson. Is there the possibility that the government will just do nothing and rely on the cost of living crisis to have an effect, and therefore firefighters will be forced to make a decision between striking and feeding their families, paying their mortgages, etc.?
Yeah, again, look, these are great questions, and thanks to everyone for submitting them. And I just make a comment, which you might say at the end, Ian, that I see there's huge numbers of questions. Look, this is just one meeting, and we need to have further meetings at local level. And if we can't answer those all tonight, we'll try and answer them in writing. We'll try and ask local officials to answer them, carry on having that dialogue. But we'll do what we can. In terms of the Henry's question about additional work, no, that's not included in the offer. just on the question of additional work, look, the union is, we know that work has changed already well, work in the fire service has always changed in reality. If you look at the history of the fire service, it's changed over the past 100 years, but it's also changed over the past 15 years. What the union's policy is that nobody necessarily objects to change, but actually we should negotiate change. What we're against is imposed change. What we said, and Ian was there with the national officer when we met them straight after the 2% offer, is we said very, very clearly that this was an insult, and the idea of attempting to put any strings on it would be taken as a red rag to a bull. And so I don't think, in all seriousness, that actually they are looking at anything like that this year, because they're struggling to find anything that goes anywhere near meeting our members' aspirations. So the idea that we would give further any concessions on that, I think they know is not really a starter at all. So hopefully everyone's clear on that. On Paul's question about cuts, and again, look, the point is that different fire and rescue services are in different financial positions. Some of them have argued that they can't even afford the 2%. I think in some cases, possibly because they never budgeted for 2% and they just assumed it would be 2% maximum. And in other cases, some have reserves. So the picture is different between different, and some fire and rescue services in the UK aren't allowed to have reserves. So there are different, we have to take account, there are different positions across the UK. We've got to try and find a position that unifies as many of our members. So we are totally against cuts, and we've resisted cuts as much as we can. And we've had some very long running and hard fought disputes about cuts. And most of our disputes over the past decade, and we've had many of them, have been about employers basically saying, we can't afford this, we're going to have to take this off you, or we're going to have to make cuts in one way or another. We've tried to resist that. So we do not support cuts. We fight those cuts as they come along. We do not support any closures, and we certainly don't support closures to fund pay rises, but that is not our decision. I think we have to do two things. We have to campaign and demand that money off central government, and we also have to campaign and demand an improved payoff. We have to do both of them at the same time. And I think the question really pushes us to the point I tried to make in opening, that we really need, and what we've not done as yet, is get out on the streets and start to put those demands to I know some regions have been into the House of Commons, putting that pressure on MPs. We need to be doing that nationally. We need to be putting those boots on the street to demand that investment in our service that avoids that problem arising, but without saying that we're willing to take further pay cuts to pay for it as well. In terms of the final question, I think was Matt, about the will the government sit back and allow the cost of living crisis to do their work? I'm sure that's part of what they're thinking. I heard Therese Coffey, who's the health minister, being quite dismissive of the nurses and their ballot for strike action. I've got to say that's pretty shocking for a minister in charge of the National Health Service to dismiss the people who actually were absolutely central to seeing our communities through COVID, just as our members were. And it shows how insulting some politicians can be towards public sector workers, including ourselves. And we know the increasing hardship that our members and their families are facing. And it's a very tough decision to make. What we do know is that if we do nothing, they will come back year after year and they will keep attacking our wages. And that's what the evidence shows. So our view is that we have to stand up and try and resist them. And we have to stand together. And there is a mood in the country growing that workers are saying it is simply not acceptable that millions and millions of working people are asked to pay the price for a mess that none of us created. And that's why people are taking action. In terms of the hardship, and it brings just one last point, is going on strike is never easy, and no one tries to underestimate that. And I've both been on strike and taken part as the general secretary in strikes, and you can see the hardship it brings. We know the difficult decisions that our members have to take when faced with that choice, and the only thing that sees people through is a bit of an old-fashioned word, solidarity. It's about sticking together and standing together. And you all work in different workplaces, and you're the people who will know the different levels of hardship that people face. And we've done a fantastic job over the years of raising money from local communities to provide support for people in particular hardship. And we've managed to, by and large, do that very, very successfully. And one thing that I've always seen when we've gone into battles is that despite what you might read in the press, despite what the interviews that you might see on the telly or comments from politicians, local people know that their firefighters are essential to their community. They know that their local firefighters, the people who work in our emergency fire controls, in our training centres, who deliver our service as a whole, are very proud of what they do and would not take action unless it was absolutely necessary. And whenever I've seen it, I've seen a huge support from local communities for their local firefighters. I think if it comes to it, we will see that again. And we also have to say that actually, you know what, we need some support from you in those circumstances. So it's going to be our job, and he's not here tonight, he's on leave today. Ricardo Latorre is working with our 13 regions to assess where we're up to on the current situation in relation to hardship funds that exist locally. And we will rebuild those hardship funds and make sure that we do whatever we can to protect every single member, and particularly those who
Okay, Matt, we lost you for the last 2 seconds there, but I think we got the gist of it. And just a little bit more on that from myself. I've been in those meetings with Matt, the various national officials and the AGS, and I don't think from our side of things we can make it any clearer in those meetings. This is about an increase in pay, and on pay scales, it's not about negotiating, extra duties, extra responsibilities for firefighters to carry out whilst they're at work. Obviously, we can't stop whatever they come forward with an offer. And obviously, depending on what it is, it'll be depending on whether it gets put to members and whether it's worth it. But we've made it crystal clear in all of those meetings. This is about an uplift in pay and only pay. Okay, right. We've got a couple of questions. I've got some for Matt Wrack, so you can take a breather, Matt. First one, and these have come from several members. Can I be sacked for taking part in strike action? And then the second one is, does the consultative ballot go to the independent scrutineer? Mark.
Thanks, President. So the first question, can you be sacked for taking part in strike action? So I will certainly answer this, but actually the ballot we're talking about now is the consultative ballot on the rejection of the 5%. So again, I'll just stress that this is an internal consultation with FBU members. So this ballot we're talking about now, the consultative ballot, isn't about strike action. But to answer the question, no, you can't be dismissed for taking industrial action if the ballot has been called as a result of a properly organised ballot, and you're taking actions as a consequence of that ballot. And that's why we're going to, Matt mentioned it earlier, to such great lengths to make sure that the things that we have to provide to the employer, like the notification of the ballots, the matrices, etc., are absolutely spot on and 100% accurate. You can't be dismissed if it's about a trade dispute between workers and an employer, such as trade terms and conditions, etc. And you can't be dismissed for taking part in industrial action if a detailed notice has been given to the employer, telling them and notifying them of the intention to take action. And all three points mentioned there will all be complied with to protect you. If the services or a rogue chief fire officer does attempt to dismiss, it's automatically unfair dismissal. If they're dismissed within the first 12 weeks. After those 12 weeks, the law says that you can be dismissed. But I would say this, you know, the chief fire officers have to show that they've made legitimate attempts to resolve the dispute. It would be incredibly inflammatory for chief fire officers to pick on the entire workforce and dismiss an entire workforce. We have had that happen previously when Section 188, which is essentially fire and rehire, have been utilised. The chief fire officers that utilise Section 188 to sack the entire workforce, they're all gone pretty soon after they took that disastrous decision. Some took retirement, some left. All our members who were threatened with the 188 are still there. And again, as I say, I'm pretty sure that if a chief fire officer decided to sack their entire workforce, that FBU members throughout the UK would have a point of view on that. And it would be very risky for chief fire officers to do that in what is and what will have been a legitimately and lawfully convened strike. I also think that the whole trade union movement would have a point of view on that as well. On the second question, President, does the consultative ballot go to an independent scrutineer? Quick answer to that is yes. The consultative ballot does. So the same, it goes to Popularis, who we mentioned scrutiny to consultative ballot as they would to a ballot, for instance, if we were looking at strike action. So yeah, I hope that answers those questions. Thanks, President.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Right, Matt, back to you. Question from Dean: will the FBU, teachers, unions and nurses join forces and strike together? If not, why not? Question from Niall: the worry that I am picking up from the station is that staff are worried about the financial cost of going on strike. They do want a fair pay rise, but the cost of living crisis has made this a real worry. I think you've just answered that one, Matt. From Jamie: how do we as members take this dispute directly to government? Only their agreement to fund us will end this dispute. And then one from Paul: why have we not considered ASOS? Because this can often cause equal disruption, as most brigades rely heavily on pre-arranged overtime. Okay, Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, on Dean's question, we will absolutely consider joint action with other unions if it comes to that. Look, we're consulting on the offer now. The next phase would be, so we're not at the stage of a strike yet, but if it comes to that, then yes, we absolutely will consider that, and we are having those discussions with other unions. We would also, as I said earlier, we would also want to make sure that our voice, particularly about the fire service and the role of firefighters and the pay of firefighters, is heard. So that may, and I don't know the answer to this, but that may mean, for example, that we take some action on our own and we take some action with others. And again, that's what what rail workers and CWU have done. They've taken action separately, and there's multiple disputes on railways. And then if you recall, last Saturday, or the Saturday before, sorry, there was then joint action with protests in various towns and cities across the country as well. In terms of the cost of living crisis and how that's look, I think I've tried to answer that. There's no getting away from the fact that going on strike is hard, and it is a hard thing to do. And no one is trying to underestimate that in any way whatsoever. We know, people are, every meeting we go to, people are telling us the difficulties that they're having and their families are having, and it's affecting everyone. Our assessment is that unless we stand up, and this is a time to do it because there is a change in mood in the country, and we hope that we can create the sufficient political pressure to shift things or to change direction, that's the time to do that. But also I think that and it ties in with one of the earlier questions about what strike tactics, and I know people have a whole range of views, but one of the things we will have to consider is precisely that issue of hardship, how much money people lose by taking strike action. And we will undoubtedly take account of that, and I'd urge people to make sure that your branch, i.e. your workplace rep, knows your views on it, feeds that through to your brigade committee, to the regional committee, and the executive council, I assure you, will take account of all of those factors. Jamie asked a really good question about the central government, and the example that I always use is the battles we had over pensions under the coalition government, and we knew it was never going to be easy, but our case was absolutely watertight, and our members knew and understood that case, and we had regular lobbies of Parliament. And we now know through court papers that there was correspondence between different bits of government where they put their hands up, and ministers, and some of them have been mentioned tonight, by the way, said, you know what, we can't beat the FPU on its arguments. And the power of this is when you get a firefighter in uniform going into the House of Commons and confronting an MP or confronting a minister. And we had members, one occasion, I think, chasing Eric Pickles down the corridor of the House of Commons to put the case to him because they knew the case better. And I think we need to do that. It doesn't mean that they will change their opinion, but it means that they know they can't win the argument. And we've got to keep putting that pressure on. And many of you will recall a fantastic day when we managed to convince the Labour Party to call a debate on our pensions, and the gallery of the House of Commons was absolutely rammed with firefighters in uniform, and the then minister, the English minister, Penny Mordaunt, was obviously in extreme discomfort, would not look up into the gallery at our members because they had decided that actually she was telling lies to the House of Commons, and they were going to make sure that she knew that they knew she was doing that. So I think understanding the case, developing a professional case, and we've got a professional case for professional pay, making sure our members know that, taking that to government and making the case for professional pay, but also making the case for a fully funded modern fire and rescue service is absolutely the right thing to do. And finally, on Paul's question on action short of strike, just to be clear, action short of strike has not been ruled out. The Executive Council is keeping that under review. There are pluses and minuses to it. The biggest downside in an initial bit of the campaign is that it differs from service to service, the degree to which, for example, fire and rescue services are reliant on overtime. We know that some are very reliant on it. We know that others have designed, for example, duty systems, which mean they can get away without over-reliance on overtimes. So it has a very patchy impact across the whole of the UK, and therefore it's not as straightforward. But to be clear, Paul, it is something that we are keeping under consideration. And if you take the pensions dispute, we balloted for both. So that is something that is certainly under consideration. And again, I think your views through the branch to the brigade committee, to the region and to the Executive Council are very welcome, and we will definitely take account of those comments and views.
Okay, thanks, Matt, and being mindful of the time. I did say we're going to finish at 8 o'clock, so I'm going to make this the last question. I know lots of people have asked lots of questions. As I say, keep attending your meetings, keep asking the officials. They will come back and get the answers from us if they don't know them. So last one from Gareth Smith, and then we'll wrap it up, Matt. Are we not at risk of missing the boat if we take weeks to consult and further weeks to ballot before any action can even be threatened?
Yeah, Gareth, that's a good question, and I understand the frustration of some members. Look, it takes. We've got 33,000 members. They work in all different parts of the UK. Some of them were concentrated in the big towns and cities, and as we know, some of them work in very remote areas, and we've got to get to all of them. So it's a huge task to get out to, in some cases, to remote rural stations where we've got small numbers of FBU members on a retain fire station. So, you know, in the Scottish Islands, for example. So just ask people to take account of all of that in considering this. And we need to build, if you're going to go into a fight, we need to build the maximum unity. And that means taking account of everyone's point of view, allowing people to speak out, allowing people with differences of opinions to share those differences of opinions and debate it through and reach the best solution for all of us. And that, again, takes time. I don't think we're in danger of missing the boat. I mentioned some of the other disputes. Look, as I say, the rail dispute took months before it came to a ballot. It took the whole balloting time before it came to the strikes. And of course, then they hit the headlines. I've got no doubt the same will happen to us if it comes to it. We're slightly behind the civil servants who have already started their ballot, but their ballot is a very lengthy ballot. We're confident we can run a ballot if it comes to a strike ballot in a much shorter period than that the PCS have done. And equally, the two teaching unions have not yet balloted. So I think that in terms of the autumn of discontent that some people are talking about, I don't think we are at risk of missing the boat there. But equally, we've got to follow our processes and procedures and allow that full democratic debate. Some of you who were on the call the other week will have heard Eddie Dempsey from the RMT, and they understood this point very well and said that part of the reason they hadn't rushed to significant strike action is because one of their views was that actually other unions may be taking action later in the year, and they wanted to assess the situation at that point. So it's a complex situation. It does take time. It takes time to follow the democratic processes of the union. Please be aware that obviously there's a really good turnout on this meeting, but we've got tens of thousands of other members to get to, as well as the members who've helpfully attended this. We will put other meetings on. And if that was the last question, Ian, I could just finish on a couple of points. Look, I'll re-emphasize the point that I've made before. No one is underestimating the difficulty of what we face. No one is making any guarantees. I think making guarantees is a silly thing to do in this situation. All we can guarantee is that if we pick up the 5%, then you know what you've got. You've got 5%. Equally, you know that inflation's running at 10% currently. I suspect that if we do that, we'll be in the same position next year again. Our assessment is that we need to stand together. We need to stand up. We need to send a clear message back to our employers, back to all the governments in the UK, that this is simply not good enough. Our members are very proud of the work that we do. We're proud of the services we provide to our communities. We save people's lives. We keep people safe. But in return, I think we have the right to demand respect for our profession and respect for our service. We have the right to demand decent staffing levels, decent fire cover, and also we have the right to demand decent pay for the job that we do so that we can look after ourselves and our families. That's the message we've got to take out to every single member of the FBU in the coming weeks. And I'm sure that the people on this call will help us do that. And thanks very much from me for your participation and for all the questions we answered and for the ones we weren't able to answer. Thanks very much, Ian.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Right, everybody, as you've now heard, the EC recommending rejection of the latest offer from the employers. So the campaign continues. As we move towards a consultative ballot of members on that offer, you as officials and members have some really important work to do to ensure we get a strong return in that consultative ballot. A strong return on the ballot to reject applies more pressure on their side to make a revised offer. There's still important work to continue to do by our organisers, and if you're on the call tonight regarding the matrices, as we've said, they've got to be up to date and kept up to date, because if the consultative ballot returns a rejection as the EC recommended, I'm sure it will be, we'll need to be ready to move forward when the button is pressed on the strike ballot going out. And we cannot take our eyes off that ball while we're engaged in this consultation with members. So we've still got a job to do. So keep on discussing the pay campaign around the mess tables, in the control rooms. Keep attending your branch meetings. Ensure every member at your branch, your station, your workplace is as up to date with the pay campaign as they could possibly be. We'll be definitely having more of these online updates very soon. So please monitor your emails, the FBU website. And if you haven't registered an email, as Tam said, please register it with the FBU so you get the latest up-to-date information direct to you. And just to finish, there's been a lot of genuine concerns raised regarding the funding for any pay rises. And obviously, as a trade union, we don't trade pay rises in exchange for jobs. And that's the picture that the other side will try to paint, is the only option. However, with our members falling so far behind with their pay in real terms, we cannot sit around and wait for the bosses to tell us that they can afford to give us a pay rise. Because if we wait for that day, we will never, ever get a fair pay in the fire service. Remember what's been for the last 12 years. Remember the 2% offer. Just quickly soon found another 3% when they thought we was up for that fight. So for me, if we wait around for the bosses to tell us they can afford a pay rise, we'll be waiting forever and a day. So keep up the great work, keep up the campaigning, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.